Hi, I'm Mark Greer, Executive Director of the Akron Bicentennial, and in partnership with PBS Western Reserve, we're pleased to present the Forgotten History Forum series. The Forgotten History Forums will explore aspects of Akron's history that, while critical to our development, are not often discussed. Throughout this year-long series, we'll highlight seminal points in our history, some undiscovered, and others which still challenge us today. Topics will include women trailblazers in Akron's history, the development of the new Akron History Anthology published by the University of Akron Press, Akron's Native American history, the history of deaf rubber workers, the impact of urban renewal, particularly on Akron's Black community, and the history of the African American Church, among others. On behalf of the Akron Bicentennial, we hope you enjoy our Forgotten History Forum series.
Well, good evening. Good evening, and we are so glad to have you here. My name is Mark Greer. You've been seeing that slide on the screen for a long time, so I probably didn't have to say that, but I am the Executive Director of Akron 200, and we want to welcome you to the Forgotten History Forum series, proudly presented to you by the FirstEnergy Foundation. And if you are from the FirstEnergy Foundation, one of our key sponsors, if you're here, could you just stand or wave? Well, even though they're not here, they helped pay the bills. So let's give them a big round of applause. Very thankful to them. And we're also really, really happy as well to have our exclusive media partner, PBS Western Reserve. You'll notice the cameras behind you. Please don't turn around and wave. But we are really looking forward to this year-long series where we are exploring historical topics that are not often discussed. And we are so glad to have the support of PBS Western Reserve. Speaking of support, we want to also thank our amazing hosts and their staff, the Akron Summit County Public Library, one of our key bicentennial sponsors. Definitely. I think I see Pam Hickson-Stevenson back there. Thank you to the library. They are a huge bicentennial sponsor. Their team is amazing, and I tell people this all the time. If you don't know what all the library has to offer, please explore. You can even check out cooking equipment, and for those of us who don't cook, it's a lifesaver. And speaking of also sponsors, we also have one of our bicentennial sponsors who is also a part of our panelists here, the Akron Children's Hospital. We're really happy to have Akron Children's a part of our bicentennial and one of our key sponsors. If you're from the Akron Children's Hospital, could you wave or stand? Thank you. Well, we are here today to talk about women trailblazers in Akron history. Akron was put on the map not just by a group of industrious men, but a lot of industrious and inventive and inspiring women, and we're really happy to have this forum looking at so many of them. We are going to give you a couple of instructions, and all of you, when you came in, you should have got a note card, or you should have got one of these bags. So in the bags, you'll see some Post-it notes like this, and we are going to have those available to you. You can use your note card or the green Post-it notes for Q&A. So if you have a question, please write down your question on one of the note cards or the Post-its, and then during tonight's presentation, we will give you a prompt where you can send those note cards down to the sides of your aisle. We will pick them up, and we will get them to our esteemed moderator, who I'm happy to introduce next. And we are so thankful to have the president and CEO of the Summit County Historical Society, Leanne Neff-Hepner, here. I just want to tell you how much of an amazing person Leanne is. I've had the privilege to work with Leanne over the years, and she's also a lifesaver. She's a bicentennial commissioner, and speaking of also bicentennial commissioners, Are all of our bicentennial commissioners that are here, if you could just please stand or wave. Thank you. Thank you to our bicentennial commissioners. But Leanne is here, and she is going to be moderating tonight's forum, and so please give her a large round of applause and help me welcome to the stage Leanne Neff-Hepner.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm honored to be here. It's such a privilege to talk with you today. And I've learned so much from the women in this audience, even since I've moved here in 1997. I'm not a native Akronite. So there's hope for all of us, right? There's so much to learn and know, and I see many of you in the audience, but I just want to highlight that as we're talking about trailblazing women in Akron, that history isn't always in the past. And so we're going to talk about the past and we're going to talk about the present because it's going to impact our future. And your being here today makes that future brighter. I want to highlight some people that have made an impact on me that are here. Sandra Kurt, Akron Common Pleas, who always watched out for me, but also I think of her in her donation of Out in Akron material and representing the LGBTQ community. And I also look at Dara Harper, who is the president of the Akron Black Artists Guild. So again, we're looking at the present and into the future. And having said that, I said I came here in 1997, and I learned a lot about some amazing women even before I came. Sylvia Johnson with the Hauer House, she was then the executive director, was a great mentor to me, as well as Kathy Fernandez at Zor Village. As an intern, I actually served chili and beer in the then Ocasek building when Dan Rice first started the Ohio and Erie Canalway Coalition fundraiser. So if that doesn't bring back some memories, I don't know what will. But really, there were two women that changed the trajectory of my study and passion for telling women's stories. One of them is Dr. Teresa Byerly. She handed out these packets, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And the other one is Dr. Kitty Endress. Both came to the board of the Summit County Historical Society when in 2013, the Women's History Project of the Greater Akron area needed a new home. And they felt the work that we were doing with the Summit Awards made it a nice fit. And so both of those ladies came onto the board. And so while Teresa is here helping out and she's still on the board, Kitty is an emeritus director and unfortunately was not able to be with us today because if she was, she would be doing this welcome. She has done more research. She's written more about anyone in the Akron area than I could even try to imagine. But both of them will be at the Women's History Project Woman of the Year Awards March 12th. It's in your booklet and the postcard, and yes, there are perks for being the moderator. So that's my commercial for our program. There's still tickets. Please sign up. So as I mentioned, Kitty's not able to be here tonight, and really that's probably a blessing because we could talk all night about the women of Akron, but don't worry, the library closes at 8, and I know that, and you'll probably be home by then. Having said that, I am going to channel my inner Kitty. Given that I have not received the most notable communications award in the nation like she did. I've also not done something so brilliantly wonderful to receive an Emmy like she did. But I have read her books and her t-shirts, and if you know her, you know what I'm talking about. But instead, I'm going to channel her passion for telling the truth. And that's why timing is so very important and why I am thankful that you're here today, because when Mark came to me a little over a month ago and asked would I host this forum, I had a vision of where this was going to go, and I thought of the ladies that I'm going to introduce you to in a few minutes, and I was excited for them. But really, I've changed my mind about what I want to talk about. I'm not always just going to talk about those women that we have forgotten because I'm afraid all women will be forgotten if we don't speak up and we don't talk to each other. That's why I'm starting out by talking about Judith Resnick. Did you know that she was the second American woman in space? The first Jewish woman to do that? That she grew up right here in Akron and that she actually lived down the street from me. I had no idea that we'd have this connection. And growing up in the 80s, my first thoughts of that astronaut when I saw her on screen is she had gorgeous hair. And I'll tell you, I still love big 80s hair, if you can't tell. And so having said that, you've got this packet, and inside is a little sign that says, I remember. On the other side, it says, I was there. So as we're talking today, if something speaks to you and you remember, show it. If you were there, let people know. Because one of the problems that we have as a society is we don't talk enough to each other, we don't express, and we don't share. And when we talk to each other and we share, we find out we're so much more similar than what we ever thought, and we learn so much from each other. So having said that, let's get back to this. When the Challenger was going to take off and the first teacher was going to be part of that, I was watching it on television in my 8th grade algebra class. I remember. And having said that, also in your packet are Post-it notes. And I challenge you, because all of you that are of a certain age will remember exactly where you were at that moment, 73 seconds after it took off and it exploded. So if you wouldn't mind, please, to take a moment and write down, where were you that day? Where were you at that second? And we have Rose and Jacina, and they're going to collect these Post-it notes. If you want to write your name on there, guess what? History keeps collecting. If we don't collect this information, then we're not going to have it. So we want to know, where were you? And so I can tell you again that I was in my algebra class. It was 8th grade in Mrs. Housley, and sadly, besides the distraught and the horror, I immediately thought of that amazing lady that had gorgeous hair. And that sounds so trivial, and it sounds insignificant, but it's those small things that really bind us. That when in 2016, I was called by Todd Kleidsmith at the Ohio History Connection. He wanted to know, would I stump for Judith Resnick to be the replacement statue at Ohio Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C., the Ohio statue? I said yes, and that's when I learned so much about her. So again, I'm tied back in. I was drawn in. I found out she was the only woman in those higher math and those chemistry classes, that she was the valedictorian of her class, that she went to Carnegie Mellon, and that she ended up getting a doctorate degree in electrical engineering from Maryland University, and later became one of the first astronauts in the United States. And she grew up here in Akron. Now, I'm sorry, I can't remember if she liked Skyway or Swenson's, but I did know it at that time. Having said that, then the opportunity came up because of the location, is that when going back a little bit to 2003, when the Ohio Bicentennial was occurring, the Summit County Historical Society and Elaine Young, whom you're going to hear a little bit about later, we were approached to write a marker, Ohio historical marker for Judith Resnick, because they wanted to make sure that she was not forgotten. And we wrote that together, and there was a quote that I put in there from President Reagan. "The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted, it belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future and will continue to follow." I thought it was very heartfelt. I thought it spoke to me. But in 2025, I look back and I worry about our nation as women, especially scientist women, are taken off the websites and their stories aren't told, that I wish I would have used this quote from President Reagan instead. "We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God." And I stand here, I want to make sure that you knew that Rita Dove grew up here. She was the first African-American and first African-American woman to be appointed to the National Poet Laureate, that the stories of her grandparents propelled her to write a book of poems, Thomas and Beulah, and they say the rest is history. And for those of you that are PBS watchers, you probably noted that she was recently on Henry Louis Gates' television show, Finding Your Roots. And if you haven't seen it, you can actually go onto the Historical Studies website and get a link to watch it. And you'll see a photograph there that was taken at Bookdale CLC by yours truly, because Akron matters to her still. So in this 200th anniversary year of Akron, you've probably learned a lot about the ambitious surveyor from Moses Cleveland, General Simon Perkins, and that farmer, Paul Williams, who co-founded Akron in 1825. And of course I want to emphasize this because my office in the woodshed behind the Perkins Stone Mansion represents the founding family of Akron and Summit County. But what do we hear about the women? Do you know that Colonel Simon Perkins, his wife Grace, and her 2 sisters were responsible for helping raise the money to build the superintendent's building and the greenhouse at Akron Rural Cemetery, that's now known as Glendale Cemetery, for the Ladies Cemetery Association? Did you know, and I forgot to forward my slides. Oh, there I am. Did you know that their son, Colonel George Todd Perkins, was responsible and a benefactor of what we know today as Akron Children's Hospital? And you're going to learn more about that and the 4 Marys in his life. But what we need to talk about when we talk about women's history is that we have allies. We're not in this alone. And so it's important to make sure that we highlight those individuals that have supported us along the way. Those people that have connections in their life as well. And I know that last month you had a chance to hear Dave Lieberth talk about the Akron History Center, and I'm excited for that as the Historical Society has many notable items on display, including the patch that Judy Resnick wore on one of her earlier expeditions in space. But Dave Lieberth is a girl dad, and he's the grandfather of 4 granddaughters, and this matters because he wants to make sure that they know their history. Sadly, what happens a lot of the times for women of the past is the birth of the first white child in that area, and then they tell the father's name. Sometimes they'll tell the mother's. But did you know that the first temperance groups were here in the 1820s? And that the women used to pray in front of the saloons in the 1870s to try to keep the men, to shame them from going in and spending their entire paycheck because they needed to feed their families and there was no money? Did you know that there were women that were involved in war by going off and entertaining the soldiers, but they never came home? That there were women that participated in the Met, Helen Jepson and more. Did you know that the first African-American woman voted in Akron because her employer, Blanche Hauer, encouraged her to do so? And you're going to hear about others that did not have that right. And as we talk about this, I also like to highlight County Executive Eileen Shapiro, the very first Ohio woman appointed to the position. And then she became the first elected woman to that position. And I think that's worth a round of applause. So as we get ready to start, I just want to share something personal about my history. And many of you look at me as the president of the Historical Society and assume that I know everything about history. But to my embarrassment, I did not know till I was in college in Southeast Missouri that Sojourner Truth gave her most famous speech that we know as "Ain't I a Woman?" right here in Akron. And if I didn't know that growing up in Southern Ohio, I sure as well did not know John Brown, the abolitionist who gave his life and those of his children to try to end slavery in the United States in 1859, and of which the Smithsonian says the Civil War era begins with that raid and ends with Lincoln's assassination. And if I didn't know about him, then I surely didn't know about his second wife, Mary Ann Day Brown, who, after John Brown's first wife died a few days after the birth of their 7th child, came into a house with 6 children and then produced 13 more, whom within 2 weeks lost 4 children to disease in Richfield, and then moved to Akron, and they were at the place we now call the John Brown House, and they felt that this is their best worldly opportunity. But sadly, tragedy would strike when one of the young children peeked over the edge of the laundry that was cooking, and she was scalded. And the Perkins buried her at Glendale Cemetery. But you know what? There's a little bit of humor here, too, that across the street from the Perkins Stone Mansion, that Mrs. Brown one time asked her husband, "Can I go buy a brand new dress so that I can apologize to Mrs. Perkins because my boys have put itching powder in the outhouse?" I think it's hilarious, except for the irony. across the street. She crossed the road that was then known as the stagecoach route that intersected with the Portage Path that at one time was the boundary of the United States. She had to go buy a new dress to walk across the street and talk to another mother who had also had 11 children. Why did she need that new dress? What difference would it make to keep the peace? And why didn't they just sit together and have tea and laugh about it? The question is, what does race, ethnicity, or gender matter when we love our children? And would we love them any differently? And so today, we are going to talk with some women that have made a difference. We're going to talk about some tough stories and some amazing women. We're going to talk about the past, and then, because it's important, we're going to talk about the present, because you're going to be part of the future. May Chin, co-founder of Asia Inc. Carrie Herman from the Barberton Community Foundation, also co-founder of the Women's Endowment Fund at Akron Community Foundation and part of the Women's History Project. Tawanda Mullins, the Sojourner Truth Statue Project Chair. Norma Rist of Norma J. Rist CEO Consulting and also a co-founder of the Women's Endowment Fund at the Akron Community Foundation. And Barbara Varley, the president of the Women's Board, Akron Children's Hospital. Now, as we put this together and we were thinking about the ladies that could tell the story that we wanted to share for those trailblazers, because trailblazers sometimes are obviously out there, and sometimes we just take them for granted. And I had this conversation with Carrie Herman, and she mentioned a quote that I thought was so important, and I wondered, Carrie, if you would share your thoughts.
Oh, sure. Well, I guess it's just a factor of time passing, but when I think about people I've known who aren't here anymore, they've passed away, I'm suddenly realizing, they're kind of quickly forgotten. And I just hadn't connected those dots before. So I have a short list of women who some of you may remember, who aren't here anymore. And I didn't realize people would have the I remember signs, but if you wanna lift those up as I read this list of names, feel free, because I will be happy that you remember them. And of course, it's dangerous to make a list like this because I'm gonna leave a lot of people out. But let me just say some names. Elaine Young, Bernie Rapetti. The Dominican sisters have done so much in this community. So I remember Sister Loretta Rafter, Sister Suzanne Rapaski, Sister Libby Schaefer, Donna Early, Sylvia Lewis, Ann Brennan, Janet Parnell, Ruth Kleinfelter, Betty Taylor, Dorothy Jackson, Mary Babcox, Jody Bacon, Barbara Matthews, Ruth Dean, Rosemary Raymond, Ann Lane Gates, and I'll end with Faye Dambrod, who lots of us remember. And Tawanda, I have thanked you before. I will thank you again and always for remembering Faye and mentioning Faye whenever you talk about the Sojourner Truth program, or that project. We'll talk more about that later, but thank you for always remembering Faye. There's a Jewish tradition of putting a stone or a pebble on a grave of someone you knew and loved as a way to pay respect and show that you remember them. And I think it's a lovely custom, and so this was my way of putting a pebble on those to remember the people that I've just mentioned.
Well, talking about Tawanda, you have given over 250 presentations across not just Akron and Summit County, but Northeast Ohio. about a lady known as Isabella Baumfree, who could not read or write, but who published a book and came to Akron to sell it. So I wondered if you could tell them about a few things, but first, I know that you have a condition.
I do. Literally, when I'm giving a presentation, I always want to remind any audience that I speak with. Just last week, we were in 2 classrooms, 3rd grade, and I think 7th and 8th grade. Or whether we're speaking at a ward meeting, which we had that presentation last week as well. But before I begin, I am convinced that when you do have such a heart condition, it draws energy. And one thing about energy, you can't refuse it. It just refuses to be denied. It draws you closer to those like-minded hearts. And I would like to take the time to honor a few individuals in this room who had that same heart condition. And if you were a part of the Sojourner Truth Committee that moved mountains after the project sat abandoned for 40 years because of your heart condition, I would like to acknowledge you right now. You can raise your hand or stand. Thank you. And with that being said, I also have to remember, and I really like how you said, let's put the pebbles out on those who we remember. You know, this began not, wasn't the brainchild of it, but I knew one thing. The pioneer, and again, Faye Hirsch-Dambrot, and I will always say her name, she was with me. Because when I think back after all these years, and still the phone is ringing, right? I'm answering those calls, and I'm still connecting with you. And it's something within me that I can't let it go. And although we move to another phase, it is imperative that I live out what is everything within me to make sure I meet this opportunity of erecting the Sojourner Truth Legacy Plaza with excellence. And that is why I have the heart condition. Thank you.
So Tawanda, we've got a few slides here that talk about some extraordinary trailblazing things that Sojourner Truth did that people may not be aware of. So let's talk about her past.
Sure. So you're going to see a slide here in regards to Sojourner. Although she couldn't read or write, she can hear, and she was able to have this internal know-how, is what I will call it. And at this particular slide, you see Sojourner literally carrying her daughter, Sophia. And she knew it was time. Her owner would not let her go because she had injured herself, working tirelessly in the fields, doing all that she had to do to make it through another day. Seeing her children sold off, her family members, sisters and brothers. But she knew it was time for me to be set free. He said, no, you were injured. So you're going to stay a little while longer, and you're going to work and continue to tend to the task that you have at hand. And so Sojourner was so bold. She said, if you don't let me go, I'm going to walk to freedom. I'll take my baby, and I'm going to walk away. And you have a choice to make. You do what you want to do, but I'm going to seek freedom. And in this photo, I just can't imagine a mother, after all she had seen and witnessed and gone through, being bold enough in those times to say, I'm just going to wrap my baby up. Nothing. She had nothing. But what she had was a heart condition. Sojourner Truth refused to lose. Strong, tenacious, bold. Had a desire besides working the fields and being enslaved. And so what you see here is her carrying her daughter, Sophia, off to freedom. And I would like to mention that Sophia's 5th-generation grandson, Corey Malici, CEO, running Descendants of Truth Foundation right now, comes to Akron all the time. There's an affinity he had for you. See, talk about Akronites, so that means he has an affinity for you. And what you were able to do, all the partnerships, organizations, individual time, talents, treasures, to make sure we erected his grandmother well, just down the road here at 37 North High Street. Thank you.
And she also was one of the first women to do something that had not been done before, which was win in court. So do you want to tell them a little bit about that? That's the next slide.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leanne. So here we're going to discuss Peter, her son. It was time for Peter not to be enslaved. And so she took a white man to court and won. Now, imagine that. You see the year right here. It's just like Sojourner, again, the strength. If you could just pull a little bit and know about her life works, it is going to be a good day. But for her to do that and win, it garnered so much attention. The notoriety really started to spread wide as she went out and began those speaker bureau tours. But when she did that, it's like she sealed the fate of her son and for so many others who are in the same predicament, but she was noted as the first.
And we're going to talk in the second half of this community forum about her speech here in Akron. But why don't you tell about something that was published that people can learn more about, and
Sure.
And then you'll go into detail about her visit here in Akron in 1851.
Absolutely. We were honored to obtain a phone call, we, the committee, from Smithsonian, and I believe we received a call in October of 2023 to be featured in the March 2024 issue. And understand this, I'm not talking about one page or two. Literally, when Smithsonian came in, I was tasked to take them through the city of Akron, also to the Foundry, where Sojourner was at that time, because Woodrow had sent her to Cleveland for the mold, if you understand the process, refinery, and getting her ready to be presented to us. And also to Woodrow's warehouse, and the Sojourner Truth Legacy Plaza, of course. And again, to be tapped by Smithsonian, and I want to make sure this is abundantly clear, out of 86 pages, our issue, centerfold, we're talking about 16 colored pages within absolutely whoever did that, wow. Because how often will you be placed in a global read that people pick up on a global scale? They were interested in you because you represent that plaza. And so it was an honor for us to be published there, and they covered it from the project, as far as I'm concerned, the history, and from beginning to end.
And obviously, I was very excited about it because somehow this picture turned it sideways. So it was thrilling. But actually, why I put this picture in here, and Margaret Maurer is here from the core committee, along with Pam Hickson Stevenson and Lisa King. But when we gave this talk at the UCC, which is the church where the first original speech was given in 1851, they found this photograph of the church that we didn't know existed. And so there was exuberance there and excitement. Because prior to that, all we had was this line drawing in Samuel Lane's 90 years and over. And so as we get ready to close up this section, Tawanda, there's one other thing that was very unique about Sojourner Truth that I think would be mind-boggling if you want to share quickly about this set of slides.
Sure. So here you will see Sojourner. She was so savvy, again, with marketing and journalism. But here you see her famous quote I really enjoy: "I sell the shadow to support the substance." And that's on a pillar at the Sojourner Truth Legacy Plaza. But if I may break this down so you clearly understand, I sell the shadow, my photo, to support the substance, my travels, near and far, the life works, the blood, sweat, and tears, to make sure women's rights, the suffrage movement, the abolition movement goes forth and fall on those ears of the aggressors who simply didn't understand in that time. Her being able to take that, as others were marketing that photo, and they were profiting off of that. She got a hold of that and said, wait, no, this is me, and I am going to ensure that I have owner's rights. So the photo that you see here in that statement is now listed per 1864 in the U.S. District Court in Michigan, and we do know that is where she passed in Michigan. And so we're honored that her savviness and her ability for economic development, because she began to earn monies and resources off of her books and her photos. Very empowering.
And she copyrighted it, and she
did.
filed for it. Well, what we do know is the project benefited from an internationally recognized Akron artist, Woodrow Nash. Do you remember him? Were you there? That he had made a prototype of Sojourner Truth decades earlier for Faye Dambrot, and here he is with the statue that was revived and renovated. But as we do that, Carrie, let's go back to Faye. You mentioned her early on as someone you remember, but she's worth talking a little bit more about.
Sure, I'm happy to share some more information about Faye. I about a week and a half ago, I called her dear friend and partner in crime, Carol Garrison, to refresh my memory about Faye. She taught psychology at the University of Akron, and Carol remembers that she learned about a group in Santa Rosa, California, who were doing something around women's history. Faye and a woman named Ann, whose last name Carol couldn't remember, but Ann was the president of the Women's Faculty Club at the University of Akron. Faye and Ann wanted to do something around women's history here. Carol Garrison had become the director of women's studies at the University of Akron, and Carol explained to me that the women's studies program had resources. They had money, they had computers, they had printers, they had students who could help get things done. And so Carol, set about implementing Faye and Ann's vision for a women's history project here. And Carol reminded me that Faye was always the person behind whatever was happening around women in Akron to a large extent. Carol was the person out front. Faye was the person behind the scenes. Faye did not want to be out front. So in 1982 or 1983, they held the first women's history event in Akron. And it was the Women's Faculty Club and the Girl Scouts and a few other organizations, and it became an annual event. They were very deliberate in inviting Black women's organizations and women's organizations and clubs in the area to get involved. And those organizations had an opportunity to name their own organizational Woman of the Year, and then there were other community Women of the Year awards. And I think there are probably a number of people in the audience who have gotten Women of the Year recognition.
Well, they could show their sign and say, I was there.
Yeah. I don't have, well, I think you have, May, I think probably has.
We've got a couple here at the head table.
So women's history became a thing, and they got organized and had a board of trustees. I served on that board years and years ago. At one time, we named the Women of the Year awards after women from history, including Mary Perkins, Sister Ignatia,
Judith Resnick.
Judy Resnick. I can't, that we've gotten away from those named awards, and I couldn't find the list of names, but that was another way of just recognizing and remembering women from Akron's history. Another thing they did was, at some point, they implemented it, kind of an information fair where all the women's organizations that were involved could have a table and share information about their organization or club and what they did, and you know, maybe garner more members. And then there was a women's art show that was part of the Women's History celebrations every year for a while. Faye brought the National Women's Studies Association Conference to Akron, the University of Akron, in 1990, I believe. And Carol remembered that at some point, Faye discovered the history of Sojourner Truth and you know, immediately said, we have to have a historical marker on the site of the church where she gave her famous speech. You know, Faye helped make that happen. I don't know that whole story. But when Faye was in hospice, which was 25 years ago right now, I didn't recall, but she passed away on March 17th, 2000. But when she was in hospice, she started working on the Sojourner Truth recognition again, decided that, you know, it warranted a statue, and she contacted Woodrow Nash at that time. I don't know how far she got with it because she did pass away 25 years ago. But it was important enough to her that, you know, on her deathbed, she was still thinking about this and working on it and wanting to see it come to fruition. And she would be so pleased to know that it has.
And the Women's History Project continues. This is the 42nd program that'll be coming up March 12th. And we wanted to highlight someone that was recently recognized. And Carrie, did you want to talk about her just briefly?
Yes. So this is a great example, I think, of a woman who was forgotten. And I don't know who kind of rediscovered her and brought her to our attention. But Julia Perry was actually born in Lexington, Kentucky, but raised in Akron. She was the first African-American woman to have her orchestral work performed by the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, the Vienna Philharmonic, and the BBC Philharmonic in London. She eventually studied at the Juilliard School of Music and earned a Master of Music in Conducting and Composition in Applied Music. She was very well known and revered in Europe, and you know, I'm really pleased that we're aware of her again. The Akron Symphony Orchestra recently performed some of her work, and you know, it just makes you wonder who else is out there in history who's been forgotten, who we might discover any day now and bring to the fore again.
And that's the fun thing about history as we look back. And we have Barb Farley here, who's the president of the Akron Children's Hospital's Women Board. And she wants to share details of the women in 1890 whose foresight today impacts over a quarter of the state of Ohio with health care. Originally, they provided assistance to children when the mothers went to work. Barb?
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I wanted to set the stage in 1890. Women couldn't vote at that time. The Akron area was fairly industrialized, probably around 25,000 people. No vaccines, no penicillin. Children, 25% of the children didn't make it till their 5th birthday. So I would like to tell you about some of our significant founders of the Women's Board and Akron Children's. And the next slide, thanks. So who you see is 4 generations of Mary. And so starting on your left is Mary Perkins. Mary's married to Colonel George T. Perkins. He's an industrialist. He came from, obviously fought in the Civil War. Mary and George have 2 children. One you don't see here, it's little Grace. She died as a toddler. The other child that you see is to your far right, and that is Mary Perkins, and her last name is Raymond. She's married to Charles Raymond from B.F. Goodrich. He's an executive, and she is holding their firstborn, who is Mary. The other woman in the picture go back to your far left, and that is Mary's mother, Mary Rawson. All these Marys, and they had a significant play in our history. And what it was is that the Marys were involved in the Order of the Knight's Daughters. You would hear it either way, the Order of the King's Daughters or the Order of Daughters of the Kings. And this was a non-sectarian group that was a sisterhood around service. And there was two of these particular orders. One was the Heart and Hand Circle, and that was at St. Paul's Episcopal. The other one was the Wayside Circle, and that was at First Congregational Church. And the Marys were involved in those two orders. Back in 1890, they have a convention here in the area. And those two particular orders, of which there was many of them there convening, they saw a need for more community service, and definitely around children. And they really felt they connected, these two orders connected, and they wanted specifically some more help around children. Young women were working, and there was not a safe place for children to be cared for during the day while they were working. So one of the things they did was our Mary Perkins Raymond on the far right. She and Miss Coretta McBride make a trip up to Cleveland. And I see these two women, they're 25 years old. Coretta is graduated from Cornell. Her father is a physician and also on the Board of Education, so she has a lot of interest with medicine or health as well as education. They take a trip up to Cleveland because there's already 3 nurseries in Cleveland, and the connection is Colonel George Perkins, his uncle, Joseph, there was a nursery named the Perkins Nursery. So the two gals go up, they check out the nurseries and how they're run, and they come back and they make a pitch to a local association, and the association has a home on High Street, and the trustees allowed them to use 2 rooms. And that is the start of the Akron nursery. The next year, in 1891, Colonel Perkins donates a house, again on High Street. It's named after the infant, the Mary Day Nursery. That year, it is incorporated. The incorporation is signed by the founders, which I'm going to get into on who some of these are. But it's they remove themselves from the king's daughters. It's self-sufficient. They have, anybody can join up to 30 members, and anybody from the 2 orders can join. If you're not within the 2 orders of the Heart and Hand and the Wayside, you can join by vote. And this is the start of the incorporation, and they set their bylaws, and I'm going to explain who some of these founders are. But what I thought was so interesting, and I'd like the audience to know, is that same structure of that incorporation, where you have the ladies officers, as well as they did add trustees. In the early days, there was 5 trustees, 4 were men, and 1 was a female. That is the same structure that is today with Akron Children's. 130 years later, it still is the same structure in terms of governance, which is, I think they would be just totally amazed by that.
And you've got a few people here on this slide, if you want to mention them quickly.
Yeah, real quick. So these were our original gals that signed the charter. In the group picture on the top far right is Anna Ganter. Right below her is Julia Krause. Helen Storer is in the middle, as you can see. Julia has a sister, Mary Krause, who's on your far right. And then there is Coretta Meckybright. Unfortunately, I didn't have a younger picture of her. Now, most of these founders in some form were officers in the early days. Mary Perkins Raymond was president multiple times, and they were an assortment of founders in some way. They also continued to see again, they were child advocates, they saw another need early on, within the first couple years, of adding a kindergarten. This was a way for them to start to educate the children that was under their care. The nursery was successful, the kindergarten was very successful, so successful that it kind of pivoted to something that should not surprise the audience, is that within the first, by 1898, Akron Public Schools, or the public school system, took over the kindergarten. So Mary Day Nursery was asked, one of their trustees was Mr. Corson. He served on the Board of Education. He asked if they would do a pilot program over on Furnace Street, and they agreed, and it took off. And so the very thing that was successful for the nursery and the kindergarten actually then was pivoted over to the public system. So now all of a sudden, Colonel Perkins, at one point the organization is called the Mary Day Nursery and Kindergarten. All of a sudden, our early founders see that they have some empty rooms. And once again, they put their heads together, and they see a need through taking care of the children, through medical issues, illnesses, and many of the children are crippled, and they hire 6 doctors. They rename the Mary Day Nursery to the Mary Day Nursery and the Ward for Crippled Children. And at some point, Colonel Perkins does pass away. He donates $50,000, and they end up again building onto the facility. This was at 43 Bookdale. I don't know if anybody put your sign up, but they go ahead and they add on to the hospital, and at that point is called the Mary Day Nursery and Children's Hospital.
Thanks, Barb. And we want to talk about the industrialism, because that was so important to Akron. And we have Norma Rist here with us, who is a co-founder of the Women's Endowment Fund and her own business, and she's going to tell her story a little bit and some of the people. She's also founded Athena Akron. Norma, do you mind to share a few things with the audience, please?
Sure. I missed the last sentence that you said, but the people that I picked out?
Yes.
Okay. I had a hard time narrowing my choice of women trailblazers to share. Once you start to research, you want to keep reading. It was actually very inspiring to read about some of the women that I did not know or did not know about, or knew their name, but I didn't know how much they had done. And so that just preparing for selecting a few to bring. But I decided to bring just a few women that I either met or that I knew, or that they're friends today, in the hope that I might add something that is not recorded, but I knew about it, and so maybe I'll have a few things. So starting with Catherine Hunter. Catherine was very innovative and also an authentic, kind, and thoughtful woman leader. I remember the day at Tangiers when she introduced me to her daughter so that we could get acquainted, and so that her daughter could call me if she had a question about something in business. Catherine was described as a businesswoman, and her college degree was in business, as was mine, so we always had lots to talk about. She was the editor and publisher of 3 newspapers, Falls News, the Hudson Times, and the Summit County Democrat, for 18 years. They won more awards than any other weekly publications in Ohio. Following a master's then in guidance counseling, she created several groundbreaking courses for the University of Akron. And I think that's how initially I became aware of her offering that course, because I think I've known that name all these decades. It was Women, Plan for the Second Half of Your Life. And then the second one, Combining Career and Marriage. which was thought at the time, in what you read, to be provocative. But to the women who needed these courses, they were inspiring. She serves as chairman of Valley Savings and Loan, and after the death of her husband, John Hunter, she became the president of First Akron Corporation. Served on a dozen boards, founding trustee for E.J. Thomas Hall and the Inventors Hall of Fame. She was named the Akron Businesswoman of the Year by Inside Business Magazine, which was based in Cleveland. And in 2010, she received the Bert A. Polsky Humanitarian Award. So talking to Catherine, I rode one time with her up to Cleveland to hear the Cleveland Orchestra. And imagine, I got to ride all the way up and back and talk that whole time, because she was busy. And so even those little times that I got to spend with her were pretty important. Then there's the second one, Fran Murphy, who I only met briefly.
We see
She
the
was
signs
a-
coming up.
Pardon me?
They remember. The public remembers.
Oh, yes, yes. 55 years, imagine. She was a fierce advocate. And being a fierce advocate is one of the attributes of leadership that the Athena International Leadership Model discovered when they did a study from the first 600 or 700 recipients across the United States. And they were to identify the attributes of leadership, tenets of leadership, that were important for the 21st century. And if you combine them with the competencies of leadership, because they're two different things, but then that's the total that's needed for leadership in the 21st century. And so if you can imagine, this fierce advocate, keep that in mind, she single-handedly forced the University of Akron and the Akron Summit County Library to open their Board of Trustee meetings to the public. She insisted on including a married woman's first name in a news story, not just her husband's name. And as an aside, when Dale Allen was editor, and I knew him from my Leadership Akron class, he changed the style book to include the second mention of a woman's name to only include her last name, because that's what they would do with the men's second mention. But he only did it for Geraldine Ferraro when she ran for vice president. But I thought it was a good start, so I sent him a dozen roses. As I was reading about Fran some more, I thought maybe Fran was behind that too. Fierce advocate. A third one I chose is Deborah Cook. And Deborah started her law career in private practice as the first female attorney in Roderick Myers and Linton law firm, and handled my business incorporation. So I got to ask her a lot of questions about things that I didn't understand. She was elected to judge of the 9th District Court of Appeals in 2001, later to a seat on the Ohio Supreme Court bench, and then appointed to the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, one of only 12. Only the U.S. Supreme Court is higher. And she told me once that appointment came as she was in Miami and upstairs in a large hotel, and there was an outside area that you could walk around on the outside the hotel. And that's where she met with the president for about 3 or 4 minutes. And then it took just a little while after he went back to Washington, I guess, for her to get that appointment. And I believe that she still serves in that position today. A third one, we've lost her to Akron, but she has some of her heart here, and that's Janine Janowski. Janine came from Pittsburgh, where she was a professor at the university. She joined ABIA, the Austin Bioinnovation Institute, and then she decided to return to higher education, and she joined the University of Michigan in Dearborn. She started a new college in health and education. Not ever having been in education, I can't even remotely imagine what it takes to start a college, but that's what she did. I remember she told me she met with several college friends every year to review their goals and make sure they were on track. So then this next couple steps will make sense. A few years later, she moved to Chicago and became the president of the Richard Daley College, where she is today. An extraordinary leader and trailblazer, and I wonder what's on her list to accomplish in the next decade. And since I have her mobile phone, It won't be too long, I'll be calling to ask her. Another one I chose was Pat McKay. Pat was a licensed property and casualty insurance agent for many years, being in business and working with, running Pepsi-Cola, but later when I started my own company and working with a lot of business owners, I would ask her questions or refer someone to her. She was amazing at helping small and mid-sized businesses get started, get going, protect their risks, whatever was needed so that they were protected and they also could pay attention and run their business. So she had an opportunity to start her own agency at the age of 50. There's a trend here. She started McKay Insurance Agency and operated it successfully until she retired. So this is a reminder, it's never too late. And another one like that, Judith Barnes Lancaster. Judith Lancaster was founder of a successful medical lab in Massillon. She was helping her daughter look at law schools to decide about law for a career. Her daughter did not go to law school, but Judy did at the age of 50. 50, right? She sold the lab and successfully practiced law for many years and had a contract from the Ohio Attorney General's office for 22 years. At the same time, she served as president of the NeoMed Foundation, and I think you have her up there. She had made a donation to NeoMed, and so the archway between two buildings carries her name. At the time she was doing that, and numerous other local organizations in Akron and Canton, she was also a recipient of the Athena Leadership Award, and she joined me on the Athena International Board and then chaired that board of Athena International. We lost her during COVID. I miss her very much. So I'm
And I
glad to have a
apologize,
chance to talk about her.
her slide I will add, and you've got one more quickly so we can get to May Chin, because we're going to need to have people asking questions, because we've talked, there's so much to say.
What was the,
Last person that you have on your list, Norma.
oh, do you come back to this? Is that what
No,
you said?
just go ahead and talk about the last person on your list, because we're going to need to move forward.
Okay, quickly. Dr. Luanika was not from our community, but I wanted to tell you this story. And when I served on the Athena International Board, I attended a leadership conference in Chicago, and I knew that she was going to be there, and I had a special experience opportunity, and I want to share it because it shows that you have to be alert and ready for some of these opportunities in your life. And we're hearing about all these opportunities, but it applies to everyone here. So I knew she would be there, flying in from Washington, D.C. She served as the ambassador of the Republic of Zambia. I sent a note to the executive director, offered to be her host, meet her at check-in and show her around. I mean, someone should do that. She shouldn't wander around the hotel by herself. So I didn't hear back, and I thought they didn't have time to arrange anything, but as I checked in, they handed me a note, and it had her cell phone when she would be in the taxi coming from the airport to call her and that we would meet. That's what we did. So I showed her all the rooms. I took her to the dining room then, introduced her to the founder of Athena International, Martha Mertz, and later a staff person came and asked me if I wanted to sit with them. They had an empty seat. So I got to enjoy dinner with her, and I had my friends plus assist her the next day. So there's a story about what she would do after leaving the ambassador's position, because I had the chance to ask her. She was part of royalty, and she planned to build a special building on their land for women on the land that belonged to the royal family. She said to me, Norma, the women in my country never get to sit down. I want to build a building where they can come, they work like donkeys, and that way they can sit down. They can also use this special building for ceremonies. So I got to meet an extraordinary woman and hear her story because I raised my hand, because I offered. And so that's my challenge to you. Find a time this year and raise your hand. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we get ready for our last speaker, who has been very patient, I'm going to ask if you have questions, if you start to write those and hand them to the ends of the aisle. And I want to turn it over to May Chin, who also is not a native of Akron and has a story where she was recognizing the need to help others in the community, and it continues to grow. Would you share your story, please?
So, I have a quote that I like to read to you, and it's a Chinese proverb. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a month, get married. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. If you want happiness for a lifetime, help someone. And so the idea for the agency, Asian Services in Action, to take shape decades ago can be traced back to the values passed on through generations making up my family tree. Influenced by my parents and grandparents, I grew up in a family culture where being kind to others was a given and serving others was an expectation. I was born in the British colony of Hong Kong to refugee parents who had to flee China in the mid-40s amidst the disorder triggered by two historic events: the ending of the Second Sino-Japanese War and the beginning of Chinese Civil War. During this decade of huge social unrest, tens of thousands of Chinese fled the mainland to parts of Southeast Asia, especially to Hong Kong and Taiwan. When my parents decide to leave their homeland, they choose Hong Kong. Growing up in Hong Kong, I could hardly avoid the sprawling camps that were now home to thousands of Chinese refugees. I saw the challenges faced by displaced people, coping with poverty, starvation, overcrowding, even struggling to build new lives in an unfamiliar place. Images of families huddled in flimsy homemade shelters, assembled from cardboard boxes, made lasting impressions on me. My mother's father was the first Episcopal priest in China. She grew up in a home that was continually open to the poor and the destitute. She was taught to be kind and to help those less fortunate. It was with this spirit that she involved herself in refugee camps regularly as a volunteer, and I accompanied my mother to these visits. Consequently, at a young age, I was introduced to human suffering. Those recollections of camp life remain vivid to this day. Not surprisingly, I feel very compassionate and empathetic. Leanne wanted me to explain the quote that I gave her, which was, "We all have something to offer. It needs to come from the heart." I wanted to improve the quality of life among refugees in this country. It's a wonderful goal. However, I rely more on intangibles than tangibles, because at that time, there was no material resources, there was no agency, there was no data, because Asians are famously invisible in missing in history and missing in data collection. We are still very much in the category of other. And you know, this is a data-collected, data-oriented culture. Without the data, you don't have a strong case. And so, you know, it was very hard. And I really do believe it comes from the heart, where it's the reservoir of perseverance, courage, authenticity. And those are the driving forces that I felt I had to rely on to build Asia. And so we started, you know, I worked at the Institute as a licensed professional clinical counselor. And it was my biggest challenge, was to eat a lot of humble pie. Because regardless of the alphabet after your name, if you did not know the client culture, background, and challenges that they face, it really means nothing. And at International Institute, I was faced with so many different cultures from Bosnia, from Cambodia, from Vietnam, from Laos, from the Hmong community. I just really said, I do not know how to help you. I have to learn. The clients became my teachers. And the way I learned was I did a lot of home visits, because I feel if I see their home, I can learn a lot. And as I said, people think in mainstream, you have all these credentials, but for our population that we're trying to serve, the immigrants and refugees, it doesn't matter. Some of them can't even read your certification, okay? And you can be the best counselor. You can tell them, you know, this is your problem. This is how you need to solve it. That may not be the solution, because for thousands of years, they've lived without this counselor. They have found their own solutions to the problems. And I think the service delivery system must humble themselves and be open to learning, you know, what are the solutions for these people who are living in our community. It is an extremely exciting, rewarding process. It takes time. Change does not happen all at once. And your solution, you know, may not be their solution. Your best practice may not be their best practice. So I think it is really important to trust that they do have solutions to their own problems. Okay. So that was something that I had to learn. And so what I found was, in our community, you know, there's 65 nationalities and 100 languages. You talk about challenge. You know, when we get the funding to do a project, we don't do one project that speaks mostly English. We have to do 10 or 15 projects because we have to deal with the languages, okay? It's very, very challenging. So, you know, when I work at the International Institute, I know it was a tough act for them because they have 90 days to get them to be self-sufficient. And so, to me, the 90-day was the honeymoon period. All the problem surfaced afterwards. And when I went to the home visits, the problems were glaring. And so, how do you begin to help these communities, you know, to thrive, to be a fully contributing citizen in this country and not be a negative statistic? So one of the things is, you know, when I met with the leaders, we all want our children to succeed. And certainly, they want their children to succeed. So one of the things that we did was to provide them with an after-school program. And the program were staffed with students, high school, college students from their own communities. And that was very good to do because it built a lot of trust, you know, with the families sending their kids there. And this program, I don't know whether you have the handout, but it's in its 30th year.
And that is fantastic.
In Akron and in Cleveland.
And I apologize, we have a hard stop, so we have a couple questions. I know you've got your health center as well, so we want to highlight that. Can you give us any quick statistics about the health center?
About what?
Your International Community Health Center, because that's going to be our last slide before we answer a few questions.
Health center. You know, that was a bonus that I never expected in founding of Asia. We have this wonderful young man who followed me, and he was able to get the 2 clinics, the federal qualified health clinics, one in Cleveland, one in Akron. And the reason being is that a lot of times mainstream health centers, because they lack the cultural and the language competency, to serve the patients. A lot of the patients, we found out, especially some of the Asian patients, would take the Greyhound bus all the way to New York City or to Chicago to get medical care. And it's kind of a travesty because we have Cleveland Clinic, which is a worldwide health
We've got
organization.
amazing
And then we have
hospitals here.
people taking the Greyhound bus to New York and Chicago. So that's one of the reasons that the clinics were formed.
Thank you so much. And talking about New York, I think when I hear this question about being a registered Seneca Nation representative, and I think about Peter Jones, who helped put the statues recognizing our Portage Path, I wanted to share that I had suggested that we would have an Indigenous member on our panel, but Akron 200 will be actually having a Native American Forgotten History Forum and talk in the future. So I wanted to address that question that was asked. And we do have one. I'm going to limit you to 1 minute because, listen, we had a whole bunch of slides that we wanted to talk about, but everybody was so excited. I think you gave some really good information. You've touched people's hearts and shared some important details. But the question that we have is, how do you face a hard truth without knowing it to harden you? And Tawanda, we're going to start with you. 1 minute each.
Sure.
We didn't hear.
Okay, I'm so sorry. How do you face a hard truth without allowing it to harden you? 1 minute.
Sure. So you must begin with the end in mind, and you also have to recognize that it is timelines that we're dealing with. And either you're going to be a part of chaos or you're going to be compassionate. It's choice, right? You have choices to make. And one thing about the Sojourner Truth Legacy Plaza, and I'll end with this, it was no question to me that we needed to honor her past while we shaped her future. And so, regardless of what had taken place, her story was worthy, and the Akron history was worthy to be recognized, and that will be for generations to come. Thank you.
Hey, Barb.
Oh, I think in healthcare, and we're an independent children's hospital, children, we have to be their voice. They don't vote. So we continually have funding issues, especially nowadays, and it will greatly impact our services at the hospital. And so I think you work together, and we are called to represent the children that really don't have a voice. We're their voice.
And as you're talking, I'm actually showing other slides of stories that you would love to share with them, but we ran out of time because we have such amazing women to talk about. Carrie and Norma, I know you're going to talk about the Women's Endowment Fund. Maybe you could just briefly share what you're thinking in alignment with that question.
Sure. You want to start? You want me to?
Well, I'll start and then you can
I can
pick it
start
up.
at Marie's back deck if you want me to.
Well, in the late 80s, we met with members of Women's Network, some of whose names we've mentioned today who are no longer with us, but we had a dream of wanting to help women in the community, and we made a list. I was the scribe, a long list, page and a half, of things that we could do to help women and girls if we had the money. And so it became a goal to work toward having a fund for that purpose. And that's probably a nice segue to.
So Marie Covington and Lori Zuckerman, who's here somewhere, I think, right? There she is.
She was there.
And Eileen Shapiro and Carrie and I. One of the things that seemed to be important was figuring out how to start a foundation, but meeting Jody Bacon, who we count as the other important person in this endeavor, opened up the door and explained to us how it would work to have a fund of the Akron Community Foundation. So that's how that happened. But then there were many years before we announced what we were doing, and we quietly had 100 lunches with chicken salad sandwiches at the Akron Community Foundation, talking to other women and sharing our ideas. But I will give Marie credit for something, which is she saw it as bigger than that, in that we offered 100 founding members membership of $1,000, but it could be paid over 4 years by quarter. So it made it possible for almost anyone who wanted to be a part of that founding member group. We would share those stories with other women over lunch and invite them to become one of the founding members. It went a little over 100 because of the checks that came in a little booth. Charlie Booth, I think, sent in $4,000 at the last minute or something, from 1,000 for him, for his wife, for his daughters, anyway. And only after we had the 100 and some thousand, only then did we announce it so that we could begin to do other development work. And the thing that I want to point out, I think, is the group of us were all champions. And because we had each other, you could keep going that long. I asked someone, a young woman last week, if she was in the audience tonight and we were talking about the things we're talking about, what would she want to hear? And she said, could you tell me, how did you have the tenacity to keep doing what you were doing, to get it done, to get it going, to get innovation or something started? And I think part of that answer is you have a group of champions. You're not alone. And you get to work together, resources of everyone, energy of everyone, and you get to celebrate together. So that let us keep going, whatever needed to be done, and of course then with a very good board over these years. And I think there's probably a photo up there at some moment.
Well, you've reached a monumental time, a monumental amount before we go to May. So just quickly.
We had dinner at Marie's house and held up a 5 to celebrate $5 million in the fund. And the opportunity then, Marie was also smart. She turned it upside down. One we had was a 2, because over the years then have given away more than $2 million. And I at the time when we started this, knew the statistics that were shared to us, that only 4% of philanthropic dollars in the United States were dedicated to women and girls, and the rest were dedicated to men and boys or co-ed. And so if you have work that's being done by a nonprofit for the benefit of women and girls, if it's exclusively for them, finding the money and needing the grants that we offer to sustain a program or start a program that's important to the future of our women and girls was possible. And so if you look at all those grants anywhere, anytime, if you see a magazine article, a newspaper article anywhere about the Women's Endowment Fund and,
And they
grants,
can find that online, correct, Norma? Can they find that online? Because we're going to have to close up with May Chin to have her minute, please. We've gone over a little bit.
So your last question?
The last question is, how do you face a hard truth without allowing it to harden you? As we get ready to close.
I think, right now, there's a lot of hardship we're facing. There's a lot of hardship. And I think we need to hold on to hope. Hope that things will become better. But in order to do that, we have to be unified, to aspire goals that are going to help improve the lives for our families, for our communities, for our children, and not be drowned in anger and despair.
Thank you very much. Well, we're grateful to all of our speakers today. As you can see, there's so much to learn. We are going to close out by, Tawanda, 1 minute, if you can share how the Sojourner Truth Statue Project is continuing with its education scholarship as we close up.
Absolutely. I'd like to recognize Dara Harper and Margaret Maurer, who's a part of the Phase 2. They can raise their hands while I'm speaking. But we have moved on to Sojourner Truth Legacy Scholarships. The inaugural scholar was Demetrian Duvall, Akron Public School scholar who attended Hampton University. And that scholarship award was partnered with one of our allies, the Akron Press Club. Anyone knows Bruce, make sure you say Tawanda mentioned you. And with that being said, we're going to continue those scholarships into 2025 and beyond. And we're also expanding the scholarship pool with the Akron Community Foundation. And we'll go out and continue awareness and educational programming as well.
Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. We want to challenge you to think about the women that have influenced you in your life. The last homework that you have is to write the names of 3 women that have impacted your life. If you'd like to share that, the Historic Society would love to gather it. But what I really want you to do is not keep it to yourself, but to tell others. And ladies, thank you so much. Barb, at the very end, after the program closes, I've got a question I'll have you answer, but now I know we need to turn it over to Mark Greer.
Thank you so much, Leanne, and thank you to our dynamic panelists. We are so glad to have all of you here. Thank you to this wonderful crowd, which there were a lot of other community events happening this evening, so we are pleasantly pleased that all of you came and chose to spend your time here with us. A few housekeeping things. We want to remind you the Forgotten History Forum series, and I'm also happy to say our FirstEnergy Foundation rep is here, and we want to again thank our signature sponsor, FirstEnergy Foundation. If you could just stand. Thank you. Pleased to have the support at FirstEnergy Foundation and, of course, PBS Western Reserve. We will have one of these every month, except March, because March was just an interesting month, and so we're actually going to have 2 in a later month this year. So our next one will be in April. We'll be looking at the history of sports and athletic wear with Dominic Waters. So we're looking forward to that one. You can follow all of our events online at our website, akron200.org. That's akron200.org. And then also we want to remind you, outside we have bicentennial merchandise. If you came in, you should have seen some of our t-shirts, our hats, so be sure to pick up some of our bicentennial merchandise by Frank Miller of Our Cloth Clothing. So again, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, we're on LinkedIn, we have a YouTube page. We're not on TikTok, but we're not that hip. And so please follow us, and also, if you haven't already, sign up for our monthly e-newsletters. You can do that on akron200.org. And keep going back to our calendar. It's updated weekly. Things are being added all the time. And our last announcement, coming soon to a mailbox near you, our official Akron Bicentennial magazine. In fact, has anyone received theirs in the mail already? Oh, okay, great. So those of you, if you live in Akron, it's going to every residence and business here in Akron, but coming soon, they started going out late last week, early this week, so coming soon to your mailbox. Look forward to our Bicentennial magazine. Thank you again to Leanne Neff-Hepner. Thank you to the Akron Summit County Public Library, and thank you again to our amazing panelists and celebrating women trailblazers in Akron history. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. And the last question, Barb, if you'll email me the addresses of those locations of the Early Day Nursery and the Mary Day Nursery, we'll post that with the slides that are available online to everyone. And all the slides that you saw revolving will be available online using your QR code in the handout that you have.
Sure.
We hope that you enjoyed this Forgotten History Forum, and that you learned something new and exciting about Akron and the people who shaped it. If you're interested in watching more from this series or attending a future forum event, please visit akron200.org or pbswesternreserve.org. Thanks for watching and celebrating Akron's Bicentennial.